June 4th, 1944, 11:09 a.m. Atlantic Ocean, 150 miles west of Cape Blanco, Africa. Lieutenant Albert David stood on the deck of USS Pillsbury, watching the ocean explode. Not from a torpedo, not from shellfire, from beneath. 700 yards away, white water erupted as a massive steel hull breached the surface like a wounded whale. The conning tower emerged next, streaming water from every vent, and then the distinctive long deck of a German U-boat materialized in the Atlantic swells. U-505 had surfaced. David's hands gripped the railing. He'd trained for this moment for 6 months, studied German submarine layouts, memorized compartment locations, practiced closing scuttling valves on mock-up interiors at Portsmouth Naval Yard. But standing on Pillsbury's deck, watching the U-boat wallow with hatches popping open and crew pouring out, his training felt completely inadequate. Because German U-boats didn't surrender, they scuttled themselves. They sank with their secrets locked inside steel coffins that fell 2 miles to the ocean floor. Yet there it was, floating, crew abandoning, hatches open. The radio crackled with Captain Daniel Gallery's voice from the carrier Guadalcanal. His tone carried the urgency of a man watching his obsession become real. "Pillsbury, put your boarding party over immediately. Get aboard that boat. Stop the flooding. Get the codes. Get the machine. Move now." David was already moving. His 8-man boarding party had been standing by since dawn, waiting for something everyone said would never happen. Now it was happening, and they had minutes before U-505 slipped beneath the waves. "Boarding party away!" Lieutenant Commander George Castleman shouted from Pillsbury's bridge. David's team scrambled down cargo nets. 8 sailors chosen for strength, intelligence, and willingness to board a sinking enemy submarine that might explode, might contain armed Germans, might have booby traps, might sink with them trapped inside. Radioman Second Class Stanley Dowiak hit the whaleboat first, followed by Torpedoman's mate Third Class Zenon Lucosius. Motor Machinist's mate First Class Arthur Nispel landed heavily, nearly dropping his toolbox. Then Gordon Hosey, Patrick Cassidy, Wayne Pickles, Harold Dietzman, and Thomas Stanton. All young, most in their early 20s. None had ever boarded an enemy warship. David dropped into the whaleboat last, landing among their equipment: waterproof bags for documents, flashlights, cameras, rope, a portable pump, cutting tools, and his .45 caliber pistol, the only weapon they carried. "Cast off! Pull for that U-boat!" The sailors pulled on oars with desperate strength. 700 yards felt like 7 miles. As they rowed, David saw German sailors in the water, dozens of them, life vests, some swimming toward American ships, others treading water, watching the whaleboat pass. Several shouted in German, gesturing frantically at the U-boat. David caught one word repeated: "Sprenggranaten." Scuttling charges. The Germans had set demolition before abandoning. The boat was trying to kill itself. David's team was rowing toward a vessel designed to sink. Through the spray, U-505 grew larger. 252 feet of steel, over 1,000 tons, sitting low in the water with a visible starboard list. Water poured from open vents along the deck. The conning tower hatch gaped open, seawater streaming out. "Alongside!" The whaleboat bumped against U-505's slippery hull. The steel was covered in algae and oil. David grabbed a deck fitting and pulled himself aboard. His boots hit the deck and immediately slipped. He caught himself on a stanchion and looked back at his team scrambling up behind him. "Careful! 1 man in the water is 1 less inside." 9 Americans stood on a German submarine in the middle of the Atlantic. The U-boat shifted beneath them, the list worsening. David looked toward the conning tower. A ladder led up to the bridge. The hatch at the top was open, water pouring out. "Wodawiak, Lucosius, Knispel, with me. Everyone else, stay topside." David drew his pistol, chambered a round and started up the ladder. The rungs were wet and corroded. He reached the bridge, a small platform surrounded by periscope housings, and approached the open hatch. Looking down into that black hole with water pouring out, David's training collided with reality. "Lieutenant?" Dowiak was behind him, waiting. David holstered his pistol, grabbed the wet ladder rails and descended into U-505. To understand why 9 men were risking their lives boarding a sinking submarine, you need to understand what was happening in the Atlantic Ocean in 1944, and what Captain Daniel Gallery had been planning for 6 months. By June 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been raging for nearly 5 years. German U-boats operated in wolf packs, coordinating through radio communications to hunt Allied convoys. At the peak, in 1942 and 1943, U-boats were sinking over 650,000 tons of Allied shipping every month. Merchant sailors died by the thousands. Britain was being starved. If the supplies didn't get through, the war was lost. The weapon enabling this slaughter was a machine. The Enigma cipher machine looked like a typewriter in a wooden box, but it was infinitely more complex. When a German radio operator typed a message, the Enigma's rotors, spinning wheels with 26 electrical contacts each, scrambled each letter through billions of possible combinations. The 3-rotor naval version had 150 quintillion possible settings. Without knowing the exact rotor positions, ring settings and plugboard connections for that specific day, breaking an Enigma message was mathematically impossible. Or, so the Germans believed. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had been working on Enigma since 1939. Polish mathematicians had given them a head start. Brilliant minds like Alan Turing had developed machines to test possible settings. By 1941, the British could read some German naval traffic. But there was a problem. The Germans changed Enigma settings daily. They used different codebooks for different operations. They had special coordinate codes that were nearly unbreakable, even when you had an Enigma machine. And by mid-1944, certain German naval codes remained resistant to Bletchley's best efforts. What codebreakers needed was fresh material, current codebooks, updated rotor settings, documents showing how the Germans were using their codes. The only place to get those was inside a U-boat. Several U-boats had been captured by British forces, most famously U-110 in 1941. But by 1944, that material was 3 years old. The Germans had changed everything multiple times. Fresh intelligence could cut months off the code-breaking work, could reveal U-boat positions, could save thousands of merchant sailors' lives. Captain Daniel Gallery knew this, and he'd become obsessed with capturing a U-boat. Gallery was 42 years old, an aviator from Chicago, commanding the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and Task Group 22.3, a hunter-killer group designed specifically to hunt submarines. 5 destroyer escorts operated with Guadalcanal's aircraft to locate and destroy U-boats. In April 1944, Gallery's task group had sunk U-515 after a running battle. The German submarine had surfaced so her crew could abandon ship. Gallery watched U-515 slowly sink and realized something. His destroyers could have boarded her, could have gotten inside before she went down, could have captured intelligence instead of just sinking another U-boat. "If we had anticipated it," Gallery later said, "if we had organized boarding parties ready to go, we might have saved her." So Gallery did something unprecedented. He trained boarding parties. Every ship in Task Group 22.3 designated a team. They studied German submarine layouts. They practiced on mock-ups at Norfolk Naval Yard. They learned how to close scuttling valves, stop flooding, operate German equipment. They rehearsed launching whaleboats quickly, boarding under fire, working in darkness. Gallery's plan was radical. The next time a U-boat surfaced, Instead of sinking it, they'd capture it. His officers thought he was crazy. U-boats never surfaced intact. German crews always scuttled. The chance of actually boarding one was nearly zero. But Gallery insisted. The boarding parties trained for months. And on June 4th, 1944, Gallery's gamble paid off. Task Group 22.3 had been hunting U-boats off West Africa's coast for weeks. Allied codebreakers had detected German submarines operating near Cape Verde, though exact positions were unknown. Gallery's aircraft and destroyers searched systematically. U-505 was one of those submarines. A Type 9 sea boat, 251 feet long, commissioned in 1941. She'd completed 12 patrols, sinking 8 Allied ships totaling 45,000 tons. But U-505 was an unlucky boat. Her second commander had committed suicide aboard her during combat in October 1943. She'd been heavily damaged multiple times. The crew considered her cursed. On June 4th, under command of Oberleutnant Harold Lang, U-505 was homeward bound after an unsuccessful patrol. At 11:09 a.m., destroyer escort USS Shetland got a sonar contact 800 yards off her starboard bow. Shetland attacked with hedgehogs, forward-throwing mortars that launched patterns of depth charges. The underwater explosions were devastating. U-505's rudder jammed. Auxiliary controls failed. Aft compartments flooded. Chlorine gas from damaged batteries filled the submarine. Lang faced an impossible choice: surface and surrender, or die from chlorine poisoning. He ordered the boat to surface. When U-505 breached at 11:09, Gallery was on Guadalcanal's bridge. He saw the U-boat emerge, saw the crew beginning to abandon, and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of ordering his ships to sink the submarine, Gallery transmitted, "Do not sink. Cease fire. Boarding party away." His officers were stunned. The standard procedure was to destroy surfaced U-boats before they could fire torpedoes or escape. But Gallery saw what he'd been training for: a damaged U-boat, crew abandoning, still afloat. This was his chance. The risk was enormous. If the boarding failed, U-505 might dive again, might fire torpedoes at the American ships packed with sailors rescuing German survivors, might escape. The entire task group would be in danger while men tried to board a sinking submarine. But if it succeeded? On USS Pillsbury, Lieutenant Albert David heard Gallery's order and couldn't believe it. His boarding party had trained for this scenario dozens of times. They'd practiced on mock-ups. They'd discussed it endlessly. None of them actually believed it would happen. Now, it was happening. And David had perhaps 15 minutes before U-505 sank, taking with it the intelligence prize Gallery desperately wanted: the Enigma machine, the code books, and the secrets that could help end the war in the Atlantic. The smell hit David first when he descended into U-505. Diesel fuel, human waste, battery acid, and something sharp that burned his nose: chlorine gas from damaged batteries. Emergency lighting cast everything in eerie red. Water sloshed around his boots, already ankle-deep at the base of the conning tower ladder. David waded forward into the control room, a bewildering array of valves, gauges, wheels, and switches, all labeled in Gothic German script. Pressure gauges flickered, warning lights blinked, water dripped from a dozen places. The boat groaned. And there, bolted to a small table on the port side, was the Enigma machine. David had seen photographs during intelligence briefings. The real thing was smaller than expected, about the size of a typewriter, contained in a wooden case with 3 rotors visible through an open panel. This machine, this mechanical brain of brass and circuits, was what Germany used to communicate with every U-boat in the Atlantic. "Vdowyak! Down here!" The radio man splashed down the ladder, camera already in hand. He'd been trained specifically for documentation. Flashbulbs popped in the red dimness as Wodowiak photographed the Enigma from multiple angles. Behind them, Lukosius and Knispel arrived, followed by more team members struggling down the ladder with equipment. Knispel, we need to stop this flooding. Find the valves. Close everything. Lukosius, help him. Everyone else, search for documents, codebooks, papers, charts, anything with writing. Use the waterproof bags. The team dispersed. David focused on the area around the Enigma machine. Papers floated in rising water. He grabbed them. Operational logs, navigational charts, some completely illegible. Everything went into waterproof bags. The control room was a maze. Pipes everywhere, valves and wheels covering the bulkheads, German labels cryptic even when readable. Water continued rising. "Sir, we've got a problem." Knispel's voice came from somewhere aft. David sloshed through a narrow passageway connecting the control room to the diesel engine room. The machinist was standing waist-deep in water, hands on a large valve wheel. "This valve controls flooding to the aft ballast tanks," Knispel explained. "It's tied open with wire." The Germans didn't just open it, they made sure it couldn't be easily closed. "I can cut the wire, but there are probably a dozen more like this throughout the boat." "Cut it! Close every valve you find." Knispel pulled wire cutters from his toolbox and began working. David pushed forward, exploring deeper into the submarine. The water depth varied, shin-deep in some compartments, knee-deep in others. The boat's list made walking disorienting. He reached what appeared to be the captain's cabin, a tiny space barely 6 feet by 4 feet, containing a bunk, a small desk, and storage lockers. The desk drawers were partially open, papers spilling out. David rifled through them. Personal letters, photographs of a woman and 2 children, navigation charts marked with courses and positions, and in the bottom drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, a book stamped Geheim Kommandosasche, secret command material. This was a codebook, current procedures for June 1944. David stuffed it into his waterproof bag and kept searching. The submarine suddenly lurched. The list increased dramatically. David was thrown against the bulkhead. Papers and equipment crashed to the deck. Throughout the boat, he heard shouts. "We're losing stability!" Lukosius yelled from the control room. "The list is getting worse!" David scrambled back through the tilted passageway. When he reached the control room, the situation was obvious. The starboard list had increased from perhaps 10 degrees to at least 25 degrees. Water was rushing to the starboard side, creating a feedback loop. The more the boat listed, the more water concentrated there, increasing the list further. If U505 reached 35 or 40 degrees, it might capsize, with 9 men inside. "Knispel, can we counterflood? Level this out?" The machinist was already working his way along the control panel, studying German labels. Knispel's parents had immigrated from Germany in the 1920s. He'd grown up speaking German at home. Now, in a flooding enemy submarine 3,000 miles from home, that childhood language was keeping them alive. "These valves control the ballast tanks," Knispel said, hands moving over controls. "If I open the portside tanks to seawater, we can counterbalance the starboard flooding. But I'm guessing these are technical terms I don't fully understand." "Your best guess is better than nothing. Do it." Knispel grabbed a large wheel labeled Tauchtanks backboard, port diving tanks. He spun it counterclockwise. For a moment, nothing happened. Then David felt a shudder through the hull. The list stopped increasing. Slowly, incrementally, the submarine began rolling back toward level. "It's working!" Wodowiak shouted. The list decreased. 25 degrees became 20, then 15. The boat was still tilted, still flooding, but it had stopped the deadly roll toward capsizing. David grabbed the waterproof radio they'd brought. "Pillsbury, this is David. Boat is stabilized but still flooding. We need pumps. Multiple pumps. Now. Gallery's voice came back immediately. Pumps are coming. What about the codes? The machine? We have the Enigma. We're still searching for complete codebook sets. We need more time. You don't have time, David. That boat could sink any minute. Get what you can and get out. David looked around the control room. His team was scattered throughout the submarine, searching every compartment, fighting rising water, trying to stop flooding from a dozen points. They'd been aboard perhaps 20 minutes. They'd found the Enigma machine, multiple documents, charts, and at least one codebook. But there had to be more. 5 more minutes, David said into the radio. He moved forward into the officers' quarters and radio room. The radio room was tiny, packed with equipment, transmitters, receivers, direction-finding gear, and a small cabinet marked with lightning bolt symbols. David tried the cabinet. Locked. He pulled his pistol and used the butt to smash the lock. The cabinet door swung open. Codebooks, multiple volumes, signal procedures, grid charts showing U-boat operational areas in the Atlantic, weather codes, recognition signals for identifying Allied ships. This was it. This was what Gallery wanted, what British codebreakers needed, what could let the Allies read German naval communications. David started stuffing documents into his waterproof bag. The bag filled rapidly. He called for Stanton, who brought another bag. They worked systematically, emptying the cabinet. Behind them, the gasoline engine sound of portable pumps started. The team on deck had lowered pumps through the hatches. Knispel had gotten them running. The deafening racket of two-stroke engines filled the submarine, mixing with the smell of gasoline fumes, diesel, chlorine, and seawater. But the water level was dropping. Slowly, incrementally, the pumps were winning. David moved through the submarine one more time, checking every compartment. The navigator's station yielded more charts. The petty officers' quarters produced technical manuals. Even the galley produced a document, a patrol order detailing U-505's mission and operational area. Everything went into bags. By the time David returned to the control room, the water level had dropped from knee-deep to ankle-deep. The pumps screamed, but they worked. More sailors had boarded from Pillsbury and other destroyer escorts. The submarine was filling with Americans, all working to save a boat that an hour ago had been trying to kill them. Knispel appeared, soaking wet, oil-stained, exhausted. "Sir, I've closed every valve I can find. The major flooding is stopped. There's still some seepage, but as long as we keep the pumps running, she'll float." David looked at the motor machinist. This 24-year-old from Wisconsin who'd learned German from his parents, who'd just saved a submarine through mechanical intuition and childhood language skills, who'd prevented 9 men from drowning in a steel coffin. "Knispel, when we get back to Norfolk, I'm buying you a case of beer." "I'm going to need more than a case, sir." David grabbed the radio. "Pillsbury, David, the boat is stabilized, flooding under control. We have the Enigma machine, multiple code books, charts, technical documents, operational orders. Estimate we've filled 6 waterproof bags. Recommend we continue securing for tow." There was a pause. Then Gallery's voice came through, and David could hear the emotion barely contained. "David, you just captured a German U-boat, the first enemy warship captured by the U.S. Navy in 132 years. Well done. Secure everything. We're taking this boat to Bermuda." The intelligence haul from U-505 was staggering. 900 pounds of code books and documents, 2 Enigma machines with current shark coding rotors, grid charts showing every U-boat operational area in the Atlantic, recognition signals, weather codes, and patrol orders. But capturing the submarine was only half the battle. Now, Gallery had to keep it secret. If Germany learned U-505 had been captured intact, they'd immediately change all codes. Every Enigma setting, every procedure. The intelligence would become worthless overnight. Worse, it might expose that the Allies had been reading German codes for years, a secret that could change the entire war. Gallery's solution was radical: make U-505 disappear. All 58 German prisoners, 3 wounded, 55 uninjured, 1 killed during the attack, were immediately isolated. They were brought aboard American ships and held below decks with no contact with other vessels. They couldn't see where they were being taken, couldn't communicate with anyone. The prisoners were told nothing. Harold Lang, U-505's wounded commander, believed his boat had sunk. He thought he'd failed, that his crew considered him a coward for surfacing. The fleet tug USS Abnaki arrived and took U-505 in tow. For 17 days, the submarine was pulled 2,400 nautical miles across the Atlantic to Bermuda. The towline broke 3 times. Storms nearly sank the boat. Crews worked around the clock keeping pumps running. On June 19, 1944, U-505 entered Great Sound, Bermuda, and was immediately hidden in a secure dock, covered with camouflage netting, guarded by Marines ordered to shoot anyone who approached without authorization. The 58 German prisoners were flown to the United States and taken to Camp Ruston, Louisiana, a prisoner of war camp in the middle of nowhere. They were registered under false names, held in complete isolation from other German POWs, no Red Cross access, no letters home, no Geneva Convention rights. Their families in Germany received death notifications. Official records listed all 59 crew members as killed in action when U-505 sank on June 4, 1944. For the rest of the war, the crew of U-505 was officially dead. This violated every international law regarding prisoners of war. But the intelligence was too valuable. American cryptanalysts rushed the codebooks to code-breaking facilities. Within days, they were reading German naval communications they'd been unable to crack for months. The captured documents revealed something crucial: special coordinate codes that had been unbreakable even when the Allies had Enigma machines. These codes told U-boats exactly where to patrol, where to refuel, where wolf packs would assemble. With U-505's codebooks, American cryptanalysts broke the coordinate codes. Suddenly, Allied commanders knew precisely where every U-boat was operating. Convoys could be routed away from wolf pack positions. Hunter-killer groups could be directed to exact U-boat locations. In the months after U-505's capture, Allied shipping losses in the Atlantic dropped 60%. U-boats that had been sinking merchant ships with impunity were now being hunted with devastating accuracy. The intelligence from one captured submarine was saving thousands of lives. But there was a problem Gallery didn't know about. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had already partially broken the German naval Enigma by June 1944. They'd been reading German traffic for years through a combination of captured materials, brilliant mathematics, and early computers. When Gallery captured U-505 and brought it to Bermuda, a highly visible operation involving dozens of ships and hundreds of personnel, British intelligence was horrified. If the Germans learned about the capture, they might realize their codes had been compromised. They might investigate how long the Allies had been reading their traffic. The entire ultra-secret, the fact that Bletchley Park had broken Enigma, could be exposed. Gallery's successful capture nearly destroyed the most valuable intelligence operation of the war. British and American intelligence agencies scrambled to contain the damage. The secrecy around U-505 became absolute. Every person involved was sworn to silence under threat of court-martial. The German prisoners were kept isolated for the entire war. No one outside a handful of top commanders even knew the capture had happened. And it worked. Germany never learned U-505 had been captured. They believed it had sunk with all hands. They never changed their codes because of the incident. The ultra-secret remained safe. On October 24, 1944, Lieutenant Albert David received the Medal of Honor from President Roosevelt. The citation mentioned boarding an enemy submarine under fire but couldn't explain the classified nature of what he'd actually done. His 8-man boarding party each received the Navy Cross. All were promoted. None could tell their families why. Captain Daniel Gallery received the Navy Cross and eventually promotion to Rear Admiral. His obsession with capturing a U-boat had produced an intelligence coup, even if it had nearly exposed Allied code-breaking. Arthur Nispel, the machinist who saved the boat with his childhood German, continued his Navy career and retired as a senior chief. Decades later, he visited U-505 in Chicago and pointed out to his grandchildren the exact valves he'd closed while the submarine was sinking. Harold Lang and the 57 surviving German crew members spent the rest of the war in a Louisiana prison camp, believing they were dead to the world. They couldn't write home, couldn't receive mail, couldn't contact the Red Cross. They existed in a legal limbo, prisoners who officially didn't exist. Only after Germany surrendered in May 1945 was the secret partially revealed. The capture couldn't be kept quiet forever. The crew was finally allowed to contact their families. Their death notices were rescinded, but the full story remained classified for 10 years. In 1954, the U.S. Navy declassified the U-505 capture. The story became public. Gallery wrote a memoir. The crew members finally understood what had happened and why they'd been held in such secrecy. The Navy planned to use U-505 as target practice, sink it with gunfire like countless other captured ships. But Gallery launched a campaign to preserve the submarine as a museum. In September 1954, U-505 was donated to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. The submarine was towed from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard through the St. Lawrence Seaway and across the Great Lakes. The final leg required pulling the 251-foot, 1,120-ton submarine overland 800 feet from Lake Michigan to the museum. It took 6 weeks and cost $250,000. Today, U-505 sits in a climate-controlled underground exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry. It's the only German U-boat in the United States, the only Type 9C U-boat preserved anywhere in the world, a National Historic Landmark visited by over 1 million people annually. The Enigma machine captured from U-505 is displayed next to the submarine. The codebooks are in the National Archives. The waterproof bags David and his team used are in the Navy History and Heritage Command collection. And every year on June 4th, the museum holds a ceremony remembering the 9 American sailors who boarded a sinking submarine because their captain asked them to do something impossible.